Welcome to Sculpture Vulture. I'm Lucy Branch, a sculptural conservator and author, bringing you a series of interviews with some amazing sculptors who inspire me, and I hope will do the same for you. You can see the photographs accompanying the interview, the episode show notes, and get a free novel from sculpturevulture.co.uk. Hello, Sculpture Vultures, and thank you for joining me today. I just can't believe that another month has sailed by and that we are into November. Just time is such an odd thing, and I find myself quite often repeating the quote, "The days are long, but the years are short," which is ever more true, I find, as I get older. And as all the leaves are falling, I've begun to start to itch to begin a new creative project. And as much as I've been loving doing the podcast, and I really have, speaking to so many fascinating characters, which just fills my cup up, it doesn't quench the thirst for creating something myself in quite the same way. And so I've decided to start up a little project that is not too taxing, but I've for ages wanted to rewrite the end of one of my novels, which was Girl with a Golden Cage, and I was never quite happy with the ending. And so in order to inspire me along with that work, I have commissioned a new cover for it, because I always intended to go back to it, and I am going to be starting writing as soon as we get towards Christmas. So at Antique Bronze, we've just completed a very satisfying restoration project, the Kinder Transport statue at Liverpool Street Station. I'm sure many of you might have passed it if you've walked through the piazza to that mighty station. It's really a lovely, very sweet memorial, and it is to the 30,000 Jewish children who were transported from many destinations in Europe to the UK and were rehomed during the Second World War. So one of the children who is actually depicted in the monument came to see us as we were working, which was an immense treat. He's in his 80s now, and he was incredibly charming and had some magnificent stories to tell us, and it's precisely the kind of thing that makes the work so fulfilling for us. And I know some types of public sculpture have had a really bad rap in the last year, but it just does remind you that not all sculpture is the same, and that people do really love their sculpture. It really was incredible. We had dozens and dozens of people thank us for the work that we were doing and really gush about how much the monument means to them. And it's one of those sculptures that is so loved that it's actually come into disrepair, partly because of all the attention it gets. People crowd round it and they touch it constantly, and they eat their sandwiches sitting on the plinth. And unfortunately, the surface had really begun to change quite drastically, and so it was wonderful to see that it's actually getting the care that it needs and looking so much better for Remembrance Day. But today we have a very different type of sculptor being interviewed. I am interviewing Peter Newman, who I know quite well because I've done some conservation work on his beautiful aluminium bronze version of his iconic sculpture Sky Station, which greets people who pour out of the new Crossrail station at Canary Wharf. Peter is a very unassuming character, very down to earth, but he's been hugely successful in his career. His work can be found all over the world, and he's exhibited at Trafalgar Square, the Royal Festival Hall and the Hayward Gallery, the Turner Contemporary in Margate and the Guggenheim Museum in Venice. Although Peter has done many great works, you'll hear that the success of Sky Station has taken even him by surprise, which just goes to show that you can't always plan for success. It's a great story. Now, I have to just add a little comment here. The sound on this episode, I'm afraid, is not perfect. Peter is very softly spoken, and at times the whir of his computer almost overtakes his voice, so you'll just have to listen carefully. If you're working in a noisy studio, you might need some headphones for this one. But I began our conversation today by asking if he'd always been creative.
I think from a fairly young age, certainly from around about the age of 9 or 10, I started to draw and really enjoy it. And it was something that was noticed by a teacher of mine at the time. And so certainly from about that kind of age. Before that, I'm not sure if it's probably not for me to say, but I can remember that because it was something that was mentioned to my mother, and she reminds me of that occasionally. And so it started pretty young.
Fairly early. And so was there someone in school that encouraged you, or a figure at home?
Well, that was certainly an encouragement. And then when I went to my next school, there was a real encouragement, actually. There were 2 teachers there who I am eternally grateful to for their enthusiasm. There was actually a key thing that happened that led into that, which was my father took a job in Paris when I was about 9 years old. And so my mum and dad moved to Paris, and we had this interesting decision of whether should I go with them or should I stay at school. And I had friends at the school and I wanted to stay. So I stayed in the UK, and that meant I had a lot of time on the weekends and things like that. And these 2 teachers did this wonderfully generous thing, which was that they could see that I was interested in art, and I think maybe had a sense that I had, these weekends, not a lot to do, and they gave me the keys to the art school.
Oh, wow!
And so I could go let myself in on the weekend and amuse myself with the printmaking machine, the etching plates, and do things like that. And of course, when you're young and someone trusts you like that, it's a wonderful thing, and I so you respond to that. So I would kind of go in, make things, and and then on Monday or whatever, whenever the next art class was, I would be keen to show them what I'd been doing with my time there, and that kind of set up this very what I think you call a positive feedback loop. So it was a godsend that I could do that at that time.
I don't know if you've read that book Bounce, which is by Matthew Said, about high achieving people. And one of the things that he did talk about was a study about why certain people do well in things. And one of the key things was opportunity, which other people may not have. And they looked at table tennis players, and this one street in this area that had the most incredible number of brilliant table tennis players. And one of the things that they'd done is the coach had given these kids the keys to the area at school, or it might have been outside, but there was a table tennis table there. And so the fact that they had access to this above anyone else meant they put the hours in. Yes. And so they were saying, well, but how on earth are all these kids so brilliant? They can't just be born table tennis players in this one street. But it turned out that was it. That was the fundamental part. So
fantastic. Yes, I think we all respond so well to trust and encouragement, and across really all things, table tennis as much as
And so, was it more traditional paintings and prints that you were doing there?
Yes, at that stage it was very much drawing and painting, and there was this printmaking machine, so that was interesting, and I was interested in that as a process, because there are stages to making an etching plate, and then there's sort of big reveal at the end when you pull the paper off the print and you're never quite sure what you're going to get. So that was a slightly unusual thing, perhaps beyond the painting and drawing. But yes, it was quite early on, so it's fairly traditional media at that stage. But there was a flip side to this thing of my folks being in Paris, which was that I then go there in the holidays and kind of had a lot of time there, but not necessarily so many friends to see. So I would take myself to galleries and see stuff, and so that was sort of the other side of it, is that Paris is wonderful for the fact that you can walk everywhere. So as a young boy, you can take yourself anywhere on your own steam. And I didn't know what I was doing, but I would get the magazine, which was called Periscope. I think it still is. It's a sort of Time Out equivalent back then. And I would look up the galleries that had somebody on it I'd heard of, which weren't many people at that time, but I would see maybe, oh, there's a Picasso show. I've heard of him. I'll go and see that. And I'd go and visit the galleries. And what I didn't realise actually was that in the magazine like that, you get a listing of everything that's on. So some of them got sort of private dealers in their apartments, and I would go ring on the bell and asked to be let in, and they were quite surprised, this young English boy turning up to see their Picasso prints. But they were really nice to me. I think they thought it was quite charming.
I bet they loved it. I bet they thought fantastic.
I think so, because they were very nice to me, and I think I sort of had a slightly romantic idea. Oh, the art world's so nice. Yeah. You go around to people's homes and you look at drawings and well, it is a nice one, but it was a very unusual take.
I'm slightly worried now that this whole ticket system that all the galleries seem to have. I went to Paris a short while ago, and you had to be organised and book your slot to go in. And I just think that probably would put a whole host of people up. Well, if they're like me, if I won't be organised enough to book everything in advance and do it, I would turn up and just and spend time in galleries when I used to have more access to them. But I mean, now the whole regimented system would not suit my temperament at all, so I'd probably miss out.
No, and especially not when you're young as well. The idea of standing in a queue for more than 5 minutes is sort of the last thing you want.
Mind you, that's why public art is the answer, isn't it?
Public art's the answer to many things, we think, yes.
So did you think about any other career other than art? Was it just, no, that's going to be for me?
Actually, pretty much that's the case. I think I decided I was going to be an artist when I was about 50, which is very young. I think.
Yeah, very young.
Quite such a big decision. And as I say, maybe, a little naively or I didn't really understand what I was getting into, but I'd had such a great experience with these teachers at school who kind of showed me about art and really art as a way of approaching the world and looking at things and thinking about things. It's not just making things. And that just seemed to be really compelling, and that was sort of like a lifestyle choice. I wanted to live like that. I wanted to approach the world like that.
No, you'd found your people. And you just wanted to join them.
Yes. I found my people and fascinated by the way, this alternate way of looking at the world. And these, I mean, to give you an example, their version of art teaching was very eccentric. Sometimes the double art class would be watching a Louis Buñuel film, or it would be listening to the Velvet Underground, or it wasn't tied to the making of images per se. It was about creativity, and it presented an exciting world to me. And so, yes, chose it very young, and then followed through with that in that I was very impatient to get to London. I'd been at school in Dorset and kind of very sleepy, and I'd liked this experience of Paris, but that was over. And then I had this, choice of should I do a foundation course, which would have been more local in the countryside, but then I wanted to go to college, and I applied to Goldsmiths, and I didn't actually know that much about Goldsmiths at the time.
So it couldn't be less like a sleepy college in sort of Dorset, could it? The environment at Goldsmith is just something else.
Very, very different, and again, I think I went in there. I knew it was a good college, but the key thing was they accepted me without the foundation course, which would have taken a year, and I was very excited by that because it was sort of flattery. I thought, of course, I'm ready, thank you. But it meant that I was very young. I was only 18, yes, wow. when I started at college. And then as soon as I got there, suddenly I realised that this Goldsmiths College in '87 was a very intellectual environment. The first few lectures about postmodern theory.
Yeah.
Structuralism. I was so out of my depth. This was not the sort of this was not the kind of the romantic artist vision that my teachers had sold me on. This was a very different version. I mean, very, very interesting.
Challenging environment, though.
Very challenging, I think, at that age to kind of, to suddenly sort of, try and get your head around conceptual art. Well, again, I was very lucky because it was a really great time to be there. There was lots happening. I mean, there was, I think in my second year, we all went up to see this show in a warehouse that had been put on by one of the students with the other students' work, and that was Damien's Freeze show. And so to see artists kind of taking the initiative and putting in their work and putting themselves out into the world was very, it's a very bold thing to do and very impressive. So,
did it change the way you saw things, or do you feel like there's still that part of you from being 15 and creating at that stage?
I think I'm always going to be me, and there are very different influences at different times. I think the younger me, perhaps, that chose, that made the life choice about being an artist is probably, very significant, in terms of, although the experience of being an artist has gone through lots of different twists and turns, there haven't been that many times when I've thought, I've got to be doing something.
Yeah, I made the wrong decision.
There are some. I don't think any artist hasn't had those moments, but I think remarkably few.
But when I look at your work, you've got a big range of mediums, and there's a lot of variety within it. So tell me a little bit about what it's about for you, what inspires you.
Well, it does span across various media, and to me it all makes sense in terms of what holds it all together. And there are certain themes and interests that connect to it all. I think I'm particularly interested in how we as humans relate to the space around us.
Yeah.
And so that has a relationship to architecture and how we relate to space like that. There's also a theme with the sky in my work that has connected lots of different work that I made. So I think how we relate to space, around us and above us, and also how we relate to modernity. I'm very interested in kind of how we navigate that and how that interacts with history. And for me, the most, some of the most interesting work is about a dialogue with those two things, about where we are right now and how we connect to a history that's gone before. Those, I think, are elements that exist across lots of different work. So there's the Sky Station project, which we will probably get to, and there's a parallel photography project which has been going for many years, which I'm taking photographs looking upwards in different cities around the world, different locations around the world. There was a number of years where I was making a series of paintings that were paintings of aeroplane trails in the sky, and so there's obviously a sky theme there that connects those two. And when I first showed the Sky Station, I remember a friend of mine turning up to the preview and asking me, "What's this? How does this connect to your airplane trail paintings?" And he sat down on it, lay down on it, and right on cue there was an airplane trail.
Which you had organised earlier.
I had to do a lot of negotiation
with the RAF.
With the RAF, yeah, over Trafalgar Square, just at the right moment.
Well, that just shows you, though, that how much is that supposed to be? I mean,
it was good fun, I must say. Yeah.
But I mean, we met through the Sky Station, obviously the one in Canary Wharf, not at Trafalgar Square. But tell me a little bit more about that, because I see that as something that is just, I can see why it's so appealing in all its different forms. I can see why people just love it, and that even though that's not all you do, I can see that may have propelled you forward, because it's just so iconic, a sculpture, and yet it's also humble enough because people are allowed, how many sculptures are people encouraged to sit on? Not many. And so I think you cracked it with that one.
Well, thank you so much for those kind words. I mean, it has been a real journey as a piece of art for me, and I think, well, it's certainly a very long-term project. It may even be a lifetime project.
Yeah, I can see it being. Yeah.
Yeah, and it came about through a modest proposal initially, in that I was asked by Tim Marlowe, in fact, who was organising an exhibition of models for sculptures at the Guggenheim in Venice in 2001, I think it was. And he just said to me, "Do you have any ideas for any big sculptures?" Because that was the show. It's called Thinking Big, and it's all about models for big things, many of which would never be realised. But it was about those sort of the thought process. And anyway, I had this idea. I said, "Well, I've got this idea. Here's a model." And then from that, it kind of, I became more convinced that this is something I should realise. And then I was very fortunate to be approached by some curators, and at the time when I was applied to the Arts Council, because there was an opportunity to show in Trafalgar Square. And that just seemed like, well, I'm never going to get a better chance to launch this piece than there. And the people in Trafalgar Square were fabulously generous as well, because I remember at the meeting and they said, "So we've got an idea of where it should go." And I said, "Okay, where do you think it should go?" And I wasn't really sure where they had in mind, tucked away somewhere. And they said, "Well, we think it should go right in the middle." And okay, yeah, I'm okay with that.
You weren't cheeky enough to suggest it. I think I might have. Well, of course it should be right in the middle. Where else should it be?
Good symmetry. I can't argue with the logic. Yeah, and of course that was a great place to start, because as a place, it's got, the context is very, very unique, in the history, the sense of history around you. You've got all these buildings from different periods of time. You're right in front of the National Gallery with all these paintings going back, and then, for a week, it was only there for a week, but for a week there was a sculpture that, as you say, had this unusual invitation to lie back and look upwards and kind of look above all that history, which is a kind of theme for me with the piece, that I have this idea that looking upwards is like, it's very similar to thinking about the future. And that sort of relates to gravity. Gravity gives us the past beneath us, and if that's true and we live out on the surface, then above must be the future. And so to show the piece surrounded by that history was a great starting, although a complicated place to show, as I think you probably know, because the logistics aren't so easy. We had to install it at 4 a.m, and we had to do it before the routine of the pigeons happens. They feed them so generously, so they do their business, and everything gets hosed down at 6, and then everyone starts to commute to work across it. So that was complicated. But that project, it then moved. It just appeared there for a week, unannounced beforehand. It then appeared in the City of London for a week, and then moved to Canary Wharf for what was going to be a week, but because that was the last of the 3, they actually said, well, it's proving popular, so why don't we keep it? And so it stayed there until the winter came, or until it got a bit cold in October. So, but that was in 2005. I mean, the one at Canary Wharf that's there now is obviously a completely different thing. But from there, after Canary Wharf, it went to the new Arts Centre, which you may know as this wonderful sculpture park in Wiltshire. Yeah. And there is in fact one there to this day. There's been one consistently there since 2006, I think. Very popular with the kids. They do a lot of school groups there, and because it has this social function, it's a great place for people to get together at the end of the tours.
It really seems to me like there's been a momentum to it. It's wanted, it's enjoyed, and there's been a serendipity to how it came about. Or is that actually all hard work that has made all that happen? Is it all the foundations and the bricks that you put in beforehand that's kind of tipped it over the...
Well, I'd like to say it's all hard work, but I think you're right in that there is serendipity and there is good luck. But it was very much one thing led to the other, in that the invitation to make a model then led to a place to show it. But once I had one location, I was able to sort of push to get others involved, and it has sort of snowballed from there. But what's been I think very gratifying is that actually I think the piece has been supported by quite a few institutions that recognise it as something that is an ongoing thing, in that having shown it in those places, it hasn't then been declined as an option. In fact, it has been shown at the Hayward Gallery for one summer in 2009, I think, and it's recently been included in this exhibition at Salford Cathedral. There are various permanent versions in the country, which I think was also an interesting question. I was perhaps a little concerned that once there was one, then maybe other people wouldn't want one too. But I think people understand. People have responded to the fact that it has a function and it's used. It is as much about the experience of people interacting with it and what they get from it. And it's less important that it's being shown for the first time, because it's always going to be a different experience.
And I think that people do understand that sculpture is not painting. Sculpture additions of things, and that's part of its characteristics of what it is. It's not necessarily just one unique thing and there is only ever one of them and that's what we value. It's an entirely different animal, sculpture. So it's part of its history, so I couldn't see why they wouldn't want more than one.
And it also, just to follow on from your question, that the unexpected quality of art in public has been a huge discovery for me, and a wonderful one. I mean, one thing I never imagined with the piece was that children would respond to it in the way that they do. I'd never really thought about it. When I was designing it, because the piece, as you probably know, it was inspired by this famous modernist piece of furniture by Le Corbusier and Charlotte Perriand, it's Chaise Longue, and that was the sort of inspiration. And that's very much an adult-sized thing.
Yeah.
and when I was making the prototypes for Sky Station, I was getting all the adults in my studio building to come and try it out, because I wanted it to be comfortable for as many different shapes and sizes of people as I could manage, and so I'd get people in, get them to try out different versions, and that was all kind of good sort of rational work about how to get it to function. And then I also had to make it work as a sculptural object. It had to look, it had to have its own integrity as a form as well as being functional. But then I did have this big worry when I first showed it. Would people know what it was for? Because normally sculpture is something you look at. You're not meant to touch it.
Yeah.
And so when we showed it in Trafalgar Square, I was quite nervous, and we installed it very early and went off for breakfast because we were starving by then, and then came back sort of tiptoeing into the square, and I was so relieved to see that people were lying and people were enjoying it. And this thing as well with the kids, that I think because it begins with a kind of quite low height on the outside, and it's very curvaceous. There's no sharp edges on it anywhere, and so they just kind of, it's at their level.
Yeah.
They know they're not going to really hurt themselves, or they've really struggled to hurt themselves from the form, and that was a joy. They kind of, I've seen kids running towards it. It almost seems to be their kind of thing, which I absolutely hadn't expected.
Yeah.
but it's really nice. And this thing of showing art in this public space where you haven't made a decision to go and see it, you haven't gone in through a gallery door because you're in the mood for art, you're suddenly coming across it.
Yeah.
And that's really special, and that's really exciting because you get a very honest reaction. People don't have to like it. They have every right for their, the public space really belongs to everyone. So it's kind of, all the debates about public sculpture that are going on are very valid because it has a meaning that, this is the world in which we walk through, and you kind of, if you come across something, you've got every right to your opinion.
There's this idea that sculpture's static. You're only going to find it in that one place and it's going to stay there forever and ever. And I love the fact that actually sculpt can move, and we do not have to have these things in residence forever and ever. They can change location. I think they should, things that are not relevant should be moved and taken down, and other things replace it. And there being a replenishing and a curation of public sculpture, which I don't think there is at the moment. I think a lot of things are, well, particularly men on plinths. There's a lot of just, right, that's where they are and we're never moving them. But I hope that the idea that big sculpture can move becomes a thing.
I think it's a great opportunity, and that the possibility for sculpture in public space, it doesn't necessarily have to be permanent, is enormous. And I think you're right. There's people have been too, it's very associated with this idea of permanence, which is a thing in itself, and I don't want to, that's maybe a conversation for another day.
Yeah.
I think, yes, as you say, a more relaxed approach to things appearing and moving and temporary projects in public space has to be a good thing. And certainly I've enjoyed the ability to do that. And that's why the first Sky Station being in fiberglass was really great, because it could travel easily. And it was very easy to disassemble and reassemble in different contexts, and that gives it a freedom to move. And so, yeah, absolutely. Context is such a feature with sculpture. Yeah.
And so has it been a good career for you? Or are there, I know that you just said there are days when you think maybe you could have done something easier. Yes.
I mean, I think if I wasn't an artist, I'd have been an architect. I think I've always been fascinated with that. I think, has it been a good career? That's not for me to say. It's been interesting.
Is it all creation and deep thought, or is there a lot of business goes into it as well?
I think there's a lot of work that artists do in the background to make things happen. I would love to spend all my days in the studio creating or working with other people to create things. But there's a lot of practical stuff that has to go on to make those things happen.
And are you working with a team?
It really varies from project to project. I very often work with other people, certainly. The Sky Station that's at Canary Wharf, which is how we met, that was, I think it was a 3-year-long project from the first thing. I mean, it was really wonderful in that, having had the piece in 2005, they came back to me, I think 12 years later, and said, we'd like to commission a permanent one. But from that conversation to actually arriving was, I think, 2 years. And it was quite a large casting in aluminium bronze. And that was actually, in fact, done in Spain in various different foundries. There was the main foundry that did the big pieces, and then there was a smaller foundry that did the detailed work, and then there was, so there was quite a long chain of people involved in that. It changes. I mean, there's other work that I make that's purely my own, purely just me working away in the studio on smaller scale things.
So tell people, Peter, where they can find out more about you.
Well, there's some online. I have a website, which is peternewman.net. Quite out of date, I think. It's overdue for an upgrade, but there's information there. And I have fairly recently dipped my toe into the Instagram world, and so I have a handle of Peter J. Newman on Instagram, And I'm not a huge fan of social media, but Instagram I like. I think it's,
I think it seems to be the artist's favourite space, doesn't it? I mean,
is that what you find?
Yeah, yes. And I don't know. It seems to be a good place to sell work too. It seems to actually, a lot of social media is just a lot of rubbish, isn't it? Really, but actually, it does seem to sell work.
Interesting. Yeah. What I love about it is the simplicity of an image speaking for itself for the most part.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I don't know, it seems to be more generally celebratory on Instagram. People aren't, there's less commentary.
Oh, Peter, thank you ever so much for taking the time today and talking to us. Much appreciated.
Not at all. You're very welcome. I mean, I'm enormously grateful to you, Lucy. I think what you do is incredibly important. I was very aware making the piece that we worked together on. You put things out in the world and you don't know what's going to happen entirely. There's known unknowns of people and how they'll behave, but the environment and the work you do to kind of keep these pieces looking great and as close to the intended appearance is fantastic. So.
I don't think I have ever heard a better story than Peter's one about his client commenting that he didn't see how his current sculpture Sky Station, which you lay down on and look up at the sky, linked to his previous work Jetstream, which was an image of a jet with those eye-catching white vapour trails behind them, and then suddenly roaring across the sky as a plane, leaving a very similar trail in its wake. I mean, if that wasn't meant to be, I don't know what is. And serendipity is something that not everyone believes in necessarily, but you can't deny that Peter's journey with Sky Station in particular is filled with it. The idea didn't just spring out of him. There was a suggestion that he make something large for an exhibition. The sculpture wasn't even particularly his medium. He was just in the right place at the right time, talking to someone who put the seed of the idea into his head, and once made, the opportunities started to present themselves. And I have no doubt that those opportunities could be traced back to the hard work that Peter had put in earlier in his working career, and the gift that he has for creativity and networking that he's done to make him a professional. But there has been a certain amount of natural momentum too that was unsought, which even if he planned it, he would have been very hard pushed to make it happen for himself. The world wanted a Sky Station and Peter brought it here, and we've all been along for the ride ever since. Coming up in the next episode, I'm interviewing James Butler, who is a Royal Academician and Fellow of the Royal Society of British Sculptors. His creations range from military to royalty to cultural greats like Shakespeare. He has had a marvellous and long career, and when this interview goes out, he will be 90 years old. So don't miss this episode. You're going to get to hear the voice of greatness. If you're looking for a new book, please consider one of my novels about the dark side of the art world, where sculpture is always at the heart of the story. You can get them on the show website, on the usual online retailers, or even better, keep your local library alive, ask for them in there. Thank you for joining me today. Sculpture Vulture has been brought to you by Antique Bronze.